Kav Vav Amud Aleph. We're just going to review the Mishnah. Okay, those who are following on their phones can see that I color coded it. What's the sage's opinion is in green, and what Rav Yehudah says is in a sort of purple color. Do you see that? So the sages said that Tefilat HaShahar Ad Hasod, the morning prayer until midday. That's the shot of what they said, and that makes sense because after midday it's no longer morning. It would be the afternoon, and that'd be time for the afternoon prayer. Generally speaking, the line between afternoon and morning is midday. But Rabbi Yehudah says until 4 hours. What does 4 hours mean? Usually we say seasonal hours. Let's take the ideal day, which never actually happens here in Israel. If the sun would rise at 6 and set at 6, like on an equinox day, then, if the sun would rise at 6 a.m. and set at 6 p.m., our seasonal hours would be equal to average hours, or regular standard hours, metric hours. So each hour would be 60 minutes long, and the first hour would be from 6 to 7, the second hour from 7 to 8, the third hour from 8 to 9, etc. Now, why doesn't that happen? You look in your calendars, you'll see that on one equinox, the sun basically rises and sets at around 4:40 a.m. and p.m. So we're not exactly in the middle of our time zone. There is a place somewhere in this time zone that on the equinox, the sun does rise and set at 6, but that's not us. And the other equinox, it's also like at 5:20 something, and depending on the season. But we never have a day where we set our calendar such that the sun would rise at 6 a.m. or set at 6 p.m. on an equinox day. By the way, that's the ideal day. If we were using, let's say, like good Boy Scouts, like used in the temple, they're using a sundial, that's what they would see. They would call this the first hour, the second hour, the third hour. So Rabbi Yehudah says he has until the 4th hour. The sages say, Tfilat mincha ad ha'erev. One has the prayer, the mincha, which is named after what they'd call it in the temple, which itself is named after one specific type of korban. Remember, what's a mincha? A mincha literally means a tribute. Okay? It means a tribute. So giving something to the king, or what Yaakov sent to Esav in last week's parsha, that's a mincha. And it became the word for a meal offering, a korban that's made from some sort of grain. And then that became the word for the afternoon sacrifice, which includes a meal offering, but the main part is a lamb. By the way, Tfilat HaMincha is until the evening. Very simply, according to Rambam, that means until sunset. The Vilna Gaon agrees. Why? Because at the temple, basically, they close up shop at sunset, and elsewhere it says that anything sacrificial has to be done by sunset, and anything that was, let's say, in the state of being processed, blood is in the cup, the Kohen caught the blood. He has to throw it onto the altar before sunset. So generally speaking, sunset, which is when the sun sets, that's the line. And Rabbi Yehudah says, Plaga Mincha. What exactly is Plaga Mincha? If you already know the answer to this question, good. But if not, we're going to define it at the end of this Gemara. Rashi's going to explain that there was a Havamina, it's not what it is. But this is where you know what Plag HaMincha is according to the various opinions. And the last line is, Tfilat ha'erev ein la keva, v'shel musafin kol hayom. The evening prayer has no keva, which I guess in context this means we're talking about until when one could pray the various prayers. So apparently there's no time, there's no end point until for the evening prayer. There's going to be other consequences and other understandings of this line, but generally speaking, the evening prayer, technically speaking, it starts from the time of sunset and can continue until, I guess, it's morning, whatever's all up in the morning. Yeah, please.
The learning today is Le'elam Yishri Yurtzai V'Vayom Mira Chaya Bat David.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Musaf is also all day, Kol Hayom. Because presumably in the temple there was no exact set time for the Korban Musaf. It's not a morning sacrifice or an afternoon sacrifice. Although it is true that the Musaf was generally offered somewhere between the morning lamb and the afternoon lamb. And there is a line there, Rabbi Yehudah says, until 7 hours. Ad Sheva Sha'ot. Now, this line is in parentheses, like it is in your Gemara. Why is it in parentheses? We're going to see that according to many authorities, including the Tosafos and the Rambam, this was not actually part of the Mishnah. This is a fact that it is Rabbi Yehudah's opinion, but it's found in the Brisas, not in the actual text of the Mishnah. And we're going to deal with that forthwith. But it is true. So here's, we go to the next page. We go to Kav of Amud Bet, at the bottom, they're going to ask about Rav Yehudah's opinions. Because Rav Yehudah's opinions actually do have halachic consequences. Normally, you had a mission like this, you would discount the minority opinion in favor of what seems to be the majority opinion. The sages say that you have until noon to, have your morning prayer. So that presumably would be the halacha, despite Rav Yehudah saying it's actually sometime earlier. But that's not really the case. Let's see it. Rav Yehudah says, Ad Arba Sha'oth. Hold on. I have to, if anybody knows of a friend who's having trouble getting into, by the way, our riverside over here, they should tell me. Because sometimes if I'm looking at this thing on the screen, it's hard for me to see people trying to knock. But no one's having difficulty getting in, right? Yeah, it's part of the WhatsApp group.
The updated link, I just sent over them.
Okay.
David Bragger and Bob, I think.
Okay, so one of them is with us already. Okay. Mr. Bragger. Okay.
I just sent it to him right
Fine. So the Gemara opens with Rabbi Yehudah Omer Ad Arba Sha'oth. Rabbi Yehudah says that the time for the morning prayer is until the 4th hour. This is the second paragraph, and it's where I introduced the red color. There's blue and red. Okay, to the two general understandings. The Gemara is asking, Ibailahu. General question. Ad ve'ad bichlal, Dilma, ad velo ad bichlal. Okay, the inclusive understanding of that, or the exclusive? Ad ve'ad bichlal. So what does that mean? Rashi says, and I put this in Rashi words, Le Rabbi Yehudah, hu deka ba'i, dilu rabbanan ad ve'lo ad bichlal. The sages, way they describe this, there's no ambiguity. When the sages say until chatzot is a line. Okay, they're not saying including chatzot, it's a line. And so too ad ha'erev. There's no mincha ad ha'erev, and everything else they say was pretty much unambiguous. But Rabbi Yehudah says ad arba sha'oth. I can understand this in two ways, the way the Gemara is suggesting. He has until the beginning of the 4th hour, which would mean after 3 hours are up, which means, in the example I gave, he had from 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, and that's it. Now it's the 4th hours from 9 to 10. Or does he mean once the 4th hour is completed, 10 a.m.? That's the question the Gemara is asking. What is Rabbi Yehudah's opinion? What? No, 8:50. What? Yeah, okay, yeah, basically. So at 9 a.m. the 4th hour begins. So he wants to know, do I have the entire 4th hour, or do I have until the beginning of the 4th hour? Nafkamina would be 9 to 10. According to the ad ve'ad bichlal, the inclusive understanding, the one in blue, he has until 10 a.m. according to Rabbi Yehudah. And according to the red understanding, ad velo ad bichlal, he has until 9 a.m. to daven shachris. That's the Gemara's question. There is a no. Okay, we could go on with this. Tashma. So they're going to offer proof. Rav Yehudah Omer ad plaga mincha. Rav Yehudah says we're going what? Oh. Let me see here. Who are the names of the people here?
David Bragger.
There is a David here.
And Michael Greenberg.
I don't see a Michael Greenberg.
Well, he didn't complain.
Oh, hold on. I assume this is Mr. Bragger because it's a David here.
John. Okay, another. John Greenberg.
Okay, well, there's a David Ka here. K-A. Hi.
David Kra, K-R-A.
David Kra, okay, K-R-A is with us.
Let me tell you about the job.
So we're missing someone.
We're missing.
Okay.
Let me tell you.
So,
Let them just click on the link and they'll be with us.
okay.
Okay. So the Gemara is going to bring a source. Yeah. The Mishnah says that Rabbi Yehudah says that one has until Plaga Mincha. Now, if you take Iyam Rabbi Shlama ad velo ad bichlal, hainu diika bein Rabbi Yehudah Rabbanan. If you take this exclusive understanding of Rabbi Yehudah says until Plaga Mincha, but not after velo bichlal. That means one has to daven Mincha before the last hour and a quarter of the day, which would be, in my example, 4:45 p.m. After 4:45, you have an hour and 15 minutes until sunset. So Rabbi Yehudah is saying, finish the davening mincha 4:45. The sage would say no until 6 when the sun sets. If you would take the other approach, so Rabbi Yehudah is being inclusive. Rabbi Yehudah is saying you have from 40:45 until 6 ad plaga mincha, and that includes all of plaga mincha. Plaga mincha basically is a span of time in this definition. So there's no real nafkamina because the sages also say one has until 6 to daven. So it must be that just like when Rabbi Yehudah says ad plaga mincha, Rabbi Yehudah means what? But not including plaga mincha. When Rabbi Yehudah says ad arba sha'ot, he does not include that 4th hour. Does that make sense? Hope so. So, Ela iamrat ad va'ad bichlal, Rabbi Yehudah hainu rabbanon. If you were to take this approach that where Rabbi Yehudah says inclusively plaga mincha, the entire time from plaga mincha on until sundown is time for mincha, there's no real difference of opinion between Rabbi Yehudah and the sages. And Rashi points out the Kosok Adaitach, Rabbi Yehudah plag achron shel mincha achrona ka'amad. Rabbi Yehudah is talking about the second half of the last mincha. What does Rashi mean? Terminology here. The afternoon starts at noon. The sages said, really, you shouldn't be davening mincha until half an hour after noon. So we had 6 hours, 6 seasonal hours, minus half an hour gives us 5.5 hours. The first 3 of those 5.5 is called Mincha Gedolah, okay? And Mincha Gedolah continues until what's called Mincha Ketana. Mincha Ketana is, well, we said we're at 12.5 hours, 6.5 plus another 3 brings us to 9.5 hours of the day. 3:30 p.m. begins Mincha Ketana, or the second Mincha. Mincha Ketana is from 3:30 until 6, 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours chopped in half gives us an hour and a quarter. So there are 2 plogs of mincha. Plog means a half. 2.5 divided by 2 is 1.25. So the kasal kadaitach here, the assumption of this argument in the Gemara is that when Rabbi Yehudah said plaga mincha, he means like you and I say, the second half of these 2 halves. The first half is known as mincha katana, and the second half is known as plaga mincha because after plaga mincha. But of course, there's another way of saying, well, Mincha Ketana is from 3:30 on. Everything from 3:30 on until sunset is a form of Mincha Ketana. Okay? And that's how generally we hold. You have 2 ways to daven, the Rambam is going to say. You have Mincha Gedolah, that's before 3:30, and Mincha Ketana after 3:30. Okay. So the conclusion is, Elamai ad velo ad bichlal. When we analyze Rabbi Yehudah's opinion regarding Mincha, we realize that when he says this, he is being exclusive. Okay? Hold on 1 second. But then you look at the latter statement of the Gemara. Ema Seifa. What does it say later? Sorry, in the Mishnah. What does it say? V'shel musafim kol hayom. Rabbi Yehudah omer ad sheva sha'ot. The time for davening musaf you have all day. And Rabbi Yehudah says 7 hours. Once again, I put Rabbi Yehudah's statement in parentheses. The Tanya, it says in the Brisa, Hayu lefanav shtei tefilot, achat shel musaf, achat shel mincha. One has 2 prayers on his hands. He's got to daven mincha and musaf. Now, normally, most of us take care of musaf right after shachar, so this isn't a problem. But there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances, even in the temple, by the way, this could have happened, where some of you are presented with this opportunity, musaf or mincha. So the sages say, mitpalel shel mincha, v'achar kach shel musaf, shezo tedira v'zo eina tedira. That's the general halacha. Mincha now goes first. Why? Mincha takes precedence because it's more common, more frequent. That's the better word there. Whereas musaf is less frequent. How often is there musaf? Only on special days. Okay? 6 out of 7 days of the week don't have a musaf. And Rabbi Yehudah takes a different approach. He says, Rabbi Yehudah Omer, mitpalel shel musaf, v'achar kach shel mincha, shezo overet, v'zo eina overet. Well, actually, musaf should take precedence because it's passing or fleeting. Musaf, according to Rabbi Yehudah, only has until the 7th hour. You have until 1 p.m. Under this understanding, or sometime whatever, maybe from noon. Whereas mincha, you have until the evening. Now, Rashi says, Rabbanan l'tamayhu, da'amri tfilat musafim kol hayom, kemo shel mincha. The sages make sense. They said that musaf and mincha you both have until the end of the day, basically. Hilkach, tadir kodem. Therefore, the one that's more frequent takes precedence. You could have a long span of the day where Mincha and Musaf technically overlap, so Mincha should take precedence. The Rav Yehudah Latame, Rav Yehudah is also consistent. Gamar Musafim at Sheva Sha'ot, V'tulo. He said you have until 7 hours of the day and no more. The Havila Mitzvah Overet. So because it's limited much shorter time, it's a passing commandment. V'shel mincha yesh la'od shahut ad plaga mincha. And Rabbi would say, yeah, but you still have until plaga mincha. Once again, consistency, but still quite a few more hours for mincha. Now, hold on 1 second. Got a question come in? Okay. No, it's not a question for us, so we can continue. So the Gemara is going to complete the argument. Iyamrat bishlama ad va'ad bichlal, hainu dimashkachat lehu, state filo b'hadi adadi. If you say that when Rabbi Yehudah said you have until 7 hours for Musaf, and he meant 7 hours inclusive, that means the entire 7th hour, that's from 12 to 1 p.m., that's how you could have an overlap with Mincha. Mincha started at 12:30. So if you say that Rabbi Yehudah, when he used this word ad, Sheva Sha'ot, meant the entire 7th hour, then you have a half hour of overlap, Musaf time and Mincha time, according to Rabbi Yehudah. But, it continues, if you take the exclusive way of understanding Rabbi Yehudah's language, which means until the 7th hour, which means 6 hours are up, the last time for Musaf would be at noon. When would you have Musaf and Mincha overlapping? According to this understanding, Rabbi Yehudah, the last time for Musaf would be at noon, but the first time for Mincha would be at 12:30. There is no overlap. Once Mincha time hits, Musaf already took a hike. Elamai must be ad ve'ad bichlal. When Rabbi Yehudah says Sheva Sha'ot, he means ad ve'ad bichlal. He means inclusive, the more inclusive understanding. So that means now we're going to have to go back. So now we have a problem with the ratio. Kasher ratio. Ma'ika bein Rabbi Yehudah l'Rabbanan. Before we just said that Rabbi Yehudah had an exclusive terminology, and we're left with this kasha again. If we interpret Rabbi Yehudah saying, he has until Plaga Mincha, and Plaga Mincha is now inclusively Plaga Mincha, that means this fellow has until sunset, 6 p.m. to daven Mincha, which means that Rabbi Yehudah's opinion is similar to that of the sages, just said in a different way. So the Gemara concludes, Mi safarat the high plag mincha achrona kamar. Who said that this second plag, when Rabbi Yehudah said ad plag mincha, when you be inclusive, was the second plag? Plag rishona ka'amar. When Rabbi Yehudah was referring to plag mincha inclusively, he's still only referring to that which he knows as the first plag, what we call mincha tekana. It means a person has until this span of time from 3:30 to 4:45 to daven mincha, but not after. And that's basically what Rashi says. Shel mincha achrona v'ad bichlal v'afal gav detana yav simana flag achrona dekatani ezo flag mincha. Hold on a second. Miyuda al sha'ot chaser raviyah. Previously we said that the sages say that flag mincha means when you have an hour and a quarter left of the day, 4:45 p.m. That is a line, correct. Rabbi Yehudah says when Rabbi Yehudah talks about Plaga Mincha, he means everything from 3:30 until that point, but afterwards. By the way, we have a similar term in Hebrew. What's a Chodesh? If you're reading the Bible, it says B'Chodesh. It happened on the Chodesh. So Chodesh means the renewal of the moon, and it came to mean the first day of the month, when the moon is new. And then we decide to call this long period of time, like 30 days or so, a Chodesh, because it begins on a Chodesh. So you have, let's say, in the Chumash, sometimes the word is ambiguous. If they say it happened B'Chodesh, does it mean actually the day of Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month? Or does it mean sometime in that month? So too with Plag. It's called Plag based on the beginning point, but then what after, or what is after it, or before it, whatever it may be. So, the Hachi Kamar, here's how you can understand Rabbi Yehudah. Eimat nafik Plag Rishona, the Ayel Plag Achrona. When does the first half of this latter mincha leave and the second half arrive? Nechi nafki yud aleph sha'ot chaser ravia, or achadasar sha'ot. Once 11 and a quarter hours have, 11 and a quarter, 11 hours minus a quarter, so that's 10 3/4 of an hour, 4:45 p.m. So this basically is, I guess, this is the bottom line. Now you can go back and read the Mishnah. When Rabbi Yehudah said, Rabbi Yehudah Omer ad arba sha'ot, he was being inclusive. That means a person has until 10 a.m. to daven chakras, according to his Talmud. And when he says ad plaga mincha for mincha, he means an inclusive plaga mincha, but he doesn't call plaga mincha what you and I call plaga mincha. You and I think plaga mincha starts at 4:45 and continues until sundown, and he says plaga mincha starts at 3:30 and continues until 4:45, but it still includes that entire time. We would just call that mincha katana. Okay, and it says, by the way, plag ha mincha. Which mincha is it? Anytime you have ha mincha in the Nevi'im and in the Mishnah, what is it referring to? Mincha katana, not mincha gedola. Mincha gedola is not called the mincha. Okay, well, now, please make sure your link is working. There's someone here. That's from Rabbi Nadel himself. Wow. Apparently there's someone having trouble getting in, Mr. Shore. Who is it? This is strange. I'm not getting this message up on my computer. No. No, I only see one guest. Yeah, David Craw. Yeah, we're acknowledging his presence. Okay, I don't know. Okay, let's continue. There's no downloading involved. That's a good thing. You don't have to download. This is just a joining through your browser. For maybe your phone, but if you're at the computer, you don't have to download anything. That's why it's so good. Well, at least for me. Okay? I'm using this because I thank God I have people who help process the videos. So let's continue. Rav Nachman says, "Afanan nami tanena." Let's strengthen this understanding. We actually have some circumstantial evidence of this. Rabbi Yehudah ben Bava ha'id chamisha devrim. Rabbi Yehudah ben Bava testified. Where you have testimonies instead of Omer, you have a testimony, so it must be from Masechet Eduyos, testimonies. It doesn't refer to testimonies in court. It means testimonies that were recorded by the Sanhedrin of, halachic traditions. Okay? What does he say? Shemima'anim et katana. Okay, we let the katana refuse her arranged marriage here. It's referring to Rashi has a long one here, so we could basically skip it. It's not here. We'll say it outside. He just said katana shi si'ata ima lachar bitat aviham demiduraisa ein kedushim klal. Klum sharei katana ein abas da'as. Okay, so there's a case of a woman. Well, she's quite young, and her marriage was arranged by her mother. Now, if her father had arranged her marriage, and he even takes the betrothal money, so that's pretty rock solid. She'd have to end up marrying this fellow or receiving a writ of divorce. Okay? Everything is solid there. But if the father has passed away, it's the mother who's accepting this money. It doesn't actually have full force to the extent that the young lady can actually refuse. She can veto the marriage. Okay. Next, we allow a woman to remarry on the strength of the testimony of a single individual. What is that talking about? It means he comes and testifies that the husband went away overseas and is not coming back because he has died. Now, normally, you'd say the Beis Din was going to look at this widow and say, well, how are we going to trust this one witness? Normally, testimony requires two men to testify. But we're going to allow this testimony to stand. We're going to assume that the husband is deceased as per this witness, although we have no evidence except for what he's saying. And we are even going to allow his wife to remarry on that strength. We're going to assume that she's now a single woman. A woman who's still in a marriage cannot marry some other guy. Third, well, tarnagol sheniskal b'Yerushalayim al sheharagat hanefesh. The general rule is if you have an ox gores a man to death, that ox is to be put to death. Why is ox the example used in, let's say, Sefer Shmos? Why an ox? Why not, some wild animal? Because people don't normally keep wild animals, but people do have oxen. At least in an agricultural society, if you had a field, you needed an ox, and if you were trying to keep cattle, you at least have to have some males around. So an ox was quite common. People are not worried about, let's say, even their rams or their goats actually hurting people. You know why? Because even if a goat or a ram tries to ram you, you could still give it a good fight. But anybody tries to get in the way of a raging ox or a bull, alav shalom. Okay, so a bull was the most dangerous animal. But in a chinami, if some other animal were to actually kill a person, that animal will also be killed. It doesn't mean the din applies only to an ox. If a person has, I don't know, whatever animal he happens to have, his horse. Some people have horses also. Now, horses aren't kosher, but people have horses for purposes. Your horse kills a person, so that horse is as good as dead. So why is this significant? Because it says this is a rooster. Roosters are normally not dangerous to anybody. As a matter of fact, the Gemara's example in Shabbos is the child thought he could just remove the rooster's head for a moment, but it turns out it killed the child. Right? That's the psik reshe. That's an expression. So you're not worried about chickens causing harm to people. But yes, there was a chicken that actually pecked a child to death. So they stoned the chicken because that's the Torah says they had to kill. This rooster. They had to do that. So there is such a case. The din applies to whichever animal hurts a person. By the way, this should happen to dogs also. If you have, this is unfortunately this is the case we know about the most. You have a dog that's not so good. He bites people. Okay, if a biting dog, that's a major liability, and the dog that could hurt someone, and it actually does let's say bring about a death. So that dog is to be put to death. Okay, at least that's our responsibility. The temple had priests had standards which wine they're using for libations, and the standard here is 40 days. What happens? You squeeze the grapes, put them into barrels, and then they're supposed to ferment. Now, to get good wine, you let it ferment for a while, and to get higher quality wine, you let it age properly, right? So you would have had the Havamina that maybe I can use wine straight up, just like Chazal say explicitly. If you don't have wine for Kiddush, what do? Squeeze some grapes and save the juice right there. You squeeze them an hour before Shabbos. You could use them on Shabbos. They do not have to ferment in any way. But for the temple, no, it has to be 40 days. 40 days is the wine. Not grape juice. It doesn't have to be aged wine. 40-day wine. And there's the important part. The Tamid Shel Shachar Shekarev Be'arba Sha'ot. The morning daily sacrifice was offered when? Be'arba Sha'ot. Sorry. What is the Chiddush here? Well, normally, when would they offer the first lamb in the morning? Basically at sunrise. The priests would start their day at dawn and get everything ready, and then comes the main part of the service is at sunrise. But sometimes there, once again, extenuating circumstances, could be a war going on or anything like that, and the priests would even offer the sacrifice as late as Be'arba Sha'ot, okay? Which here, by the way, it says Be'arba Sha'ot, not ad. The bet means in 4 hours. Which they said, Shema Mina ad va'ad bichlal. When he's talking about 4 hours, he means in the fourth hour. That's why I also put, not only is it in blue over here, the bet is bolded to emphasize that. So Rabbi Yehudah is basically, his precedent is that the prayers should correspond to the times of sacrificial service in the temple. Rambam, which we're going to see, is basically going to say that, the fact that you go to a 7 o'clock mini in the morning, you definitely aren't davening in the fourth hour or even the third hour. But really, what is the proper time for Shachris? If you want to get your prayer time like they used to do in the temple, it means you're going to daven with sunrise. Okay? Whereas other prayers, there's a block of time For the morning prayer, for Shachris, according to the way the Rambam understands this, it's dafka at sunrise. Everything else is just after the fact. We're going to see that inside. Amar Rav Kahana halacha k'Rabbi Yehudah hoil utnan b'chirata kawathe. So the halacha is like Rabbi Yehudah because in the chosen one, it is written as he says. What is the chosen one? So Rashi says b'chirasa is a reference to over here, one of the bottom of Rashi's. He says it's eduyos, and that's the Masechet. So the sages held like Rabbi Yehudah. Now I have a question: do we really hold like Rabbi Yehudah across the board? And it's actually kind of ambiguous. And also the question is why hold like Rabbi Yehudah? But apparently the sages like Rabbi Yehudah's opinions. But all of Rabbi Yehudah's opinions also. Remember, he said regarding 3 prayers. Which prayers? He didn't comment on Mariv. He commented on Shachris, Mincha, and Musaf. Right? And also, even if they incorporate his opinion, do they incorporate it as a Chumrah or as Ikar Adin? We'll see. There's a Tosfos here that's not really relevant for us. Let's look at the second one that says Tashma Shel Musafim Kol Hayom. My computer's fighting me for some reason. Hold on a second. What does it say? Rabbi Omer Ad Sheva Sha'oth V'Tanya Hayu Lefanav. That's a long. The first line is basically all deeper maskil. V'lo Garcinon Ema Seifa. The shell, etc. We don't say in the Gemara Ema Seifa. Why? Sheino Ba Mishma. Shedivrei Rabbi Yehudah Shamar Ad Sheva Sha'oth Eino Ba Mishnah. Okay? This line of Rabbi Yehudah, his opinion regarding Musaf, is not actually in the Mishnah. Even though, look at this. I opened up the Gemara. It's printed here. Yeah, but it's printed funny. It's in parentheses. It's not actually part of the Mishnah. It's actually something that's from a brisa. V'yesh svarim shehigiho higioto ba Mishnah. There are some svarim that actually put it into the Mishnah. Haggah, insertion over here. Let's add Rabbi Yehudah's opinion that we know about and put into the Mishnah. Are there other Mishnayos that are phantom that people know? Like that's actually not in the Mishnah, but it turns out people stuck in the Mishnah. People don't even know that it's not part of the Mishnah. Where do we have those? Well, I think we said this last time. People know about the 6th perek of Pirkei Avos. That's not a Mishnah. That's just taken from elsewhere in the Talmud. Fine, but the end of the 5th perek, a lot of the teachings in the end of the 5th perek, even though those are in, let's say, the Vilna edition, are not Mishnayos. They're also just other editions that even Rav Kapach says Rambam would disagree with. Not 100% the case. For example, that whole Ben Arba'im Levina, Ben Esri Lirdov, etc. Right? What age you do things? It actually is not correct according to the Rambam. Not only is it not a Mishnah, it's not the Rambam's Girsa, the ancient Girsa. It's not correct. According to the Rambam, what's the proper age for marriage? According to that non-Mishnah, when is the proper age for marriage? 18. That's the Shulchan Aruch's opinion also. But according to the Rambam, it's 16. Okay, so, word to the wise, I guess. So, Umiyu b'chlas farim hayishanim eino. Tosafists, who are basically writing this in the 12th century, say that the older Sfarim do not have this as a line in the Mishnah. So here's the question. The Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, who compiled the Mishnah, Lama lo hizkiru tova Mishnah. This line of Rabbi Yehudah that, yes, until the end of the 7th hour, an inclusive 7th hour to daven mincha, for davening musaf, why is it not in the Mishnah to begin with? Okay? So he says, V'yesh lomar mishum delo svirale kavatei. Rabbi Yehudah Nasi actually didn't hold of this line of Rabbi Yehudah. He doesn't think it's halacha. Whereas the other lines that Rabbi Yehudah has are halachic. You have until 4 hours of the day, inclusively daven mincha. You have until his plag mincha to daven mincha in certain circumstances, or maybe it's recommended. This line that you have until 7 hours of the day to daven musaf, Rabbi Yehudah Nasi didn't hold of it. How? Behada amar ad sheva sha'ot, aval behada kamar ad arba sha'ot, tzvirle kavatei mishum didan b'ftirata kavatei. This line in Eduyos tells us that they like Rabbi Yehudah's opinion. You have until 4 hours of the day to daven shachris, because in the temple they would offer the tamid in the morning until 4 hours. That fits. But this line about the musaf, he doesn't hold to that. Okay? And also explains why that Plag Mincha line is left in there. Really, Rabbi Yehudah Nasi would say that you have until sundown to daven Plag Mincha, But the Avid Kamar, Avid Kamar. Have you guys gotten up to that? Or maybe you've heard about this regarding Shabbos. The Gemara is going to continue and say, there is, regarding this last time for Mincha argument, or the line between Mincha and Mariv, there's two major ways to go about this. 4:45, what we call Flag Mincha, is the line between Mincha and Mariv. That's what Rabbi Yehudah says. And the sages say 6 p.m., sunset. And there are those who follow this way and those who follow that way. Shulchan Aruch says, general understanding, which is not the Maimonidean and the Rif understanding, but the Shulchan Aruch understanding is that pick one for the rest of your life. You could be part of the Rabbi Yehudah club, and from now on, make sure to always finish Mincha by Flag Mincha, and then you'll be able to daven Mariv every day after Flag Mincha. Or pick Mincha as your line. Make sure you always finish Mincha before, pick sunset as your line. Make sure to finish your Mincha before sunset, and then daven your Mariv after sunset. That's what most people are aware of. That's the one that became a big to-do on Erev Shabbos. Now we daven early on Erev Shabbos. There's an inconsistency. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, so. Well, we're not talking about 3 hours. We're just saying that we're not talking in spans of 3 hours. It's an hour, 15-minute difference. Some people have their line between the Mariv is here, and some people their line is there. Yeah, they're timing, just a different definition of the times. He is davening properly. He's just using his timing. That's what Shulchan Aruch says. By the way, the Rambam doesn't hold on to any of this, like we're going to see. Rambam's going to say, Avid Kamar means, generally speaking, the line between Mincha and Mariv is at sunset. But on Erev Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos, we incorporate Rabbi Yehudah's opinion, L'Kula. So we could take an early Shabbos, so we could also daven Mariv early. It doesn't mean you can't end Shabbos. Just because you could daven Mariv extra early on Motzei Shabbos, and even say Havdalah if you have a candle burning, okay? It doesn't allow you to do malacha until the stars come out. So we're going to what? No, you're not supposed to. No, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. You're not supposed to. Every single day you hold of this line. So you basically, most of us fell into this. The line between Mincha and Mariv is sundown, and that brings up the question because then the Shulchan Aruch says the Shulchan Aruch requires. Here's the funny thing. I'm very surprised by this. I went to this Spartan. I have the shul across the street from my house. The Shulchan Aruch requires every single Shabbos and Yontif of the year, without exception, including Pesach and including Shavuos, including Yom Kippur, to take in Shabbos early, and that means davening Mariv earlier than you would. Shulchan Aruch says normally Mariv, the time is after sunset, whatever sunset is, which he defines differently also. But the way you take in Shabbos early and every single Yontif early is by making sure you daven your Mariv before sunset. Dafka before sunset. That's how you do Tosefes Shabbos, which he also requires. Yeah, all these Spartans, they forget this come Yontif time. They're Yontif, they don't do like Shulchan Aruch. So it's a little bit inconsistent. The way the Rambam has it, I think I prefer this way, and also the Golden Gaon shows us the key to this way, which is that really, like the Rambam says, Avi Kamar simply means normally Mincha is the line, and on Erev Shabbos, you can daven Mincha early like Rabbi Yehudah. You could daven Mariv early. And not only that, the Mishnah Berurah introduced, he didn't introduce it, Magen Avraham introduced the Schomra. If you're going to be davening Mariv before sunset, like Rabbi Yehudah, so you have to make sure to finish your Mincha before Plag. You know about that? That's a lot of shuls have that hakpada. We did not grow up with such a thing because the Shulchan Aruch didn't say. The Shulchan Aruch who allowed you to daven Mariv early on Shabbos didn't say, make sure to daven Mincha early before Plag. Due to the inconsistency. So yeah, but I don't want to be inconsistent today. Yeah, but what you're doing today is inconsistent with yesterday and what you're going to do tomorrow and next week. So you're going to be inconsistent anyways. What is the question? No, there's no Yoredei here. Yoredei is part of Shulchan Aruch. Who do we generally follow? The Rambam is, like Rav Cyril says, he's usually correct. And the only one who's ever beats the Rambam is the Vilna Gaon. And when they agree on something, then you know you have something good going. And when they disagree, then you have to really have look into this. Generally speaking, the practice is, let's say here in Jerusalem and in America where we came from. And I don't know what's going on in England. I guess the British people are ambifniat from here, but the people who came from Eastern Europe, what we call general Litvish Ashkenazim, they normally hold like Rambam in this case, and that's what they generally held, which means that the line between Mincha and Ma'ariv is sunset, and on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yontiv, still Mincha you have until sunset, but you could still daven Mincha before sun. You could daven Ma'ariv before sunset, and any time after Plag, you don't have to make sure to finish your Mincha before Plag. The Aruch HaShulchan explains this. There is this zone after Plag on Erev Shabbos is still Mincha time, but it's also Ma'ariv time. Why? Because in the temple on Erev Shabbos, they would make sure to finish up all the weekday service at Plag and Mincha. The Kohen would go home, but they didn't actually close up the temple. But the Hekter Halavim, which is what? Burning the leftover sacrifices, that corresponds to Ma'ariv. Hekter Halavim usually went into the night, right? On a weekday. That corresponds to Ma'ariv. But on Erev Shabbos, they couldn't do it into the night. On Erev Shabbos, the Kohen had to make sure to even finish the Hekter Halavim before they close up the Beis HaMikdash, because that which is offered on a weekday cannot be continuously offered on Shabbos. This is a good precedent for what used to be our minhag until people read the Mishnah Berurah and the Magen Avraham and they realized, oh, I better daven mincha before Plag and Erev Shabbos if I'm going to take a Shabbos early. The general practice was no such hakpada, like in the temple. The Kohanim finish the Friday service whenever they do so, around Plag and Mincha, and they make sure to finish Hekter Halavim also before night. So that's what we grew up with. We would take an early Shabbos in the summertime. We would light candles. Well, at the time, sundown could be in New York around 8 p.m., right? Sometimes early July, you'd have an 8 p.m. sundown until you light candles at 7:45 or something like that. But we'd be leaving shul at 7 p.m. And we didn't daven mincha after Plag. Why? Because this hakada wasn't really known, and it's also unnecessary according to the Rambam. Let's see here. Now we're going into the Rambam part, and you tell me when we have to take our break as well, okay? So now we're going to stick with the Rambam. So this is the Rambam on the Sugya, and then we'll go to Rambams that are off the Sugya. He says here in Hilchos Tefillah, this is in the first parak. It depends. It's the seventh halacha according to one printing. Other printings has it as the fifth halacha. He says here, the Chen Tiknu, the sages ordained that what? Sheyehein minyana tefillot kiminyana korbanot. The number of tefillas, well, minyan, in this case, sometimes it means the number, but also it means the timing. Okay? The way the numbers work with the prayers, kiminyana korbanot, just like the sacrifices. Shtei tefillot b'chol yom, kineged shnei tvidim, 2 prayers each day, kineged shnei tvidim. Soon we're going to see that Rambam means that at the times of the tvidim. You daven shachris and mincha, when in the temple they're supposed to be offering the sacrifices. And if there's a day when there's a musaf in the temple, so too you're going to have prayer from musaf. Utfilah shekeneged talmid shel boker, he had a great tefillah shachar. Utfilah shekeneged talmid shel ben arba'im, he had a great tefillah mincha. It says in the Chumash, we're supposed to have one in the shachar and one in the ben arba'im. So we call one tefillah shachar, or in Yeshivish it's shachris, and the other one's mincha. And there's also one called musafim, okay, called tefillas musaf. And he also says that there's a prayer at night. What does that correspond to? Evrei tamid shel ben arba'im shmitaklim v'ochin kol halayla. They would have the limbs of the afternoon sacrifices, they would be consumed in the fire all night long. So David Melech also says that he would pray evening and morning and afternoon, okay? And God would hear him. But Ma'ariv isn't as obligatory as Shachris and Mincha. Oh, good, no more Ma'ariv. But you're still stuck. Can't, no, don't just read the first half of the sentence. The kiblu alehem k'filah chova. Now all Am Yisrael has accepted Ma'ariv, so it's obligatory. What part of Ma'ariv did they not accept? What's not unanimous is Ma'ariv? Well, yeah, Chazaras a shot. Rambam calls tefillas tzibur. There was no actual korban then, so even though it is technically done, I've been in a place where they did it once. Old Nusach Eretz Yisrael has such a concept that even at Ma'ariv there's a tefillas tzibur, which means there's a chazaras a shots. We have in our current, let's say, art scroll halacha k'divrei art scroll. So our art scroll sitters do have a sort of prayer at Ma'ariv that exists. What day of the year? Yom Kippur. Okay? Yom Kippur, we have an extended Mariv service that takes what should have been part of Chazaras Hashatz of Mariv, just without Chazaras Hashatz. For example, the Vidui. The public Vidui Yom Kippur is part of Chazaras Hashatz. That's the way it works with Shacharis, Musaf, Mincha, and Ne'ilah. But for Mariv, there's no Chazaras Hashatz. So we say Slichas, and then we have this public Vidui, which is basically what the Chazan would have said, but it's not in Chazaras Hashatz. Okay, good. Now, the Rambam continues. V'chein tiknu tefillah achar tefillat mincha samuch l'shkiat hachama yom hatanit bilvad k'dei losif tchina v'akasha. What is he referring to? A tefillah that has to be next to shkia, but before shkia, and that is what we call ne'ilah. Ninulu shari shamayim. It also corresponds to when they lock up the gates in the temple. And he says it's to be samuch l'shkiat hachama. The Gemara says when the sun is at the tops of the trees. And later authorities, because they had to divine everything, they said basically after what we call Plag Mincha. Okay? Sometime after Plag Mincha, you have an additional service on public fast days. Nowadays, we only recognize this from Yom Kippur. And by the way, wait a minute, this brings up a big nafkamina, which is alluded to in the Mishnah Berurah, which is not reflected in the Ashkenazic rite that was in Chutz La'aretz, but perhaps has been restored here. And that is, let's say they get together here in this shul sometime before sunset for Mincha, right? When do they want to finish Mincha? They want to make sure finish by sunset. They don't want to be in the middle of Chazaras Hashatz when the sun is setting. So they want to get that in. And they even perhaps want to also even say Kaddish Kabul before Mincha, right? Finish Mincha before sunset. In a lot of places in America, they are, let's say, letting out Yom Kippur 45 minutes after sunset, correct? So 20 minutes after sunset, the Chazan's still in the middle of his Chazaras Hashatz of Ne'ilah. That would be, according to this understanding, incorrect. Really, the Chazan should finish the Chazaras Hashatz of Ne'ilah when? Just before sunset. Wait, that's what he's supposed to do then. What are you going to fill up the time with? So you're a little bit stuck. Avinu Malkeinu, that's the only thing left after Chazaras Hashatz. So yeah. So, yeah. You look in the sources. You say if the duchening has to be before sunset, Kal V'chomer, the prayer has to be before sunset. It's not a din in duchening; it's a din in Chazaras Hashatz. The Chazaras Hashatz has to be finished before sun goes down. So what are you going to do now? And I've suffered through prayer services like this where what happens? So now that's it. You have, I don't know, when do they say Mariv? Sometimes they're nice. They say Mariv will be 25 minutes after sundown, or whatever it may be. That's still not going to break your fast until Yom Kippur is out, according to our minhag. So what are you going to fill it with? Avinu Malkeinu. How slow can you drag out Avinu Malkeinu? And not only that, you rush through Ne'ilah. You have the Chazan looking at his clock. He's rushing through the words of Ne'ilah and the Vidui just to say Avinu Malkeinu nice and slowly. So not extra putin. The Mishnah Berurah already said this. Really, do like the old minhag, and like we do every time else. Take the slichas out of Chazaras Hashatz, because normally, how often do we say slichas in Chazaras Hashatz? It's always after Chazaras Hashatz. In Minhag Art Scroll and the old Ashkenazic Machzorim from Chutz La'aretz, until recently, the slichas were in Chazaras Hashatz. The Mishnah Berurah says, just take the slichas out of Chazaras Hashatz, put them back after the Shmona Esrei, after Chazaras Hashatz, and now the tefillah is much more balanced. You will finish the Chazaras Hashatz of the Ne'ilah right before sunset, and after sunset, in the Tosefes time, in Ben Hashmashos, now you have to say all the slichas and Avinu Malkeinu. It's a much more balanced. Okay? Now, the Chafetz Chaim wrote this. He wasn't living in Jerusalem. He wrote this in Poland. Okay? So this is, it's almost a question. How come the slichas of Ne'ilah got put into the Chazaras Hashatz? Normally, slichas are where? After Chazaras Hashatz. That doesn't really fit. You know, it's a kind of a strange thing. It also doesn't allow us to finish the davening on time. This part never had a problem. In their machzorim, the slichas are always after Chazaras Hashatz. And this is another thing. There are Ashkenazic congregations where they put back the slichas. You know, all of Yom Kippur is supposed to be about slicha and tefillah, right? Why are you not saying slichas at Musaf and Mincha and Shachris? I looked in my art scroll boxer, and I also looked in the Rinat Yisrael and the kolbo that my grandfather used to use, and the Birnbaum. Okay? Even the Birnbaum does not have slichas at most of the prayers of Yom Kippur. What happened to those prayers? No, they disappeared. So you put them back in. That's what you should be doing. Okay. So Rambam says here in the ensuing halachas, I marked three different types of opinions. There's the that which is in bold. That's the Ikra Din. Every prayer has its main time. And then there's what's in purple. That's Rabbi Yehudah's opinion. Then there's green, which is the opinion we saw in the Mishnah attributed to the sages. Look what the Rambam says. Mitzvata sheyatchil li'itpalel im hanesa hama. The Rambam says the mitzvah of Shachris is that you start davening Shmona Esrei with what? With the sunrise. That's the mitzvah. Usmana ad sof sha'ar revi'it shehu shlish hayom. But its time continues until the first third of the day, the inclusive fourth hour of Rabbi Yehudah, which means you really have until 10 o'clock. That's why they mark, Sof Zman Tefillah in your calendar. That's what we calculated it. V'im avar o ta'ah v'yitpalel achar arba sha'ot ad chatzi hayom yatsa yedei chovat tefillah, aval lo yatsa yedei chovat tefillah b'zmanah. And for whatever reason, he davened Shachris between 10 and 12, the last 2 hours of the morning. He's fulfilled his obligation to pray, but not his obligation to pray at the correct time. What's yeah, it could, yeah, and also yes, and the Rambam says it also starts before Neitz Chama, which means if a person davens Shachris, basically any time between Alos and Neitz, and from Neitz until the fourth hour is sort of a b'diavad time according to the Rambam. Even though people sometimes have to daven Shachris 20 minutes before sunrise, that's fine. If you allow people to daven Shachris an hour, 2 hours after sunrise, they could daven Shachris 20 minutes before sunrise or 40 minutes before sunrise. It's all the same din according to the Rambam. So what happens is the person who's davening Shachris too late is still technically davening Shachris because what? Hold on 1 second. Okay, good. Yeah, the parking. And yeah, you have to watch out for this. So you wouldn't get it in the Zman, which means that sometimes in the temple, they didn't even offer the Talmud by 10 o'clock. You can imagine an emergency situation, they didn't offer the Talmud even until, let's say, 11:15 in the morning. It's still Talmud. It's not when the sages told us to do so, but it still counts. If they wait until noon, avar zmano batel korbanot. The Rambam says similarly regarding what? Mincha. Var marnu shetfilat mincha keneged zman tamid shel bein arbaim tiknu zmana. The mincha time for your prayer corresponds to mincha in the temple. Now notice, the Rambam didn't actually write this explicitly. Where did the Rambam say kavar b'yarne? I looked in the Rambam, everybody looks in the Rambam, they say, Rambam never had this line. No, that's what the Rambam meant in the earlier halacha from the first parak, when he said keneged. When the Rambam says keneged, well, usual Farshim point out, when he said keneged, he meant at the right time. So he's telling you, mincha corresponds to when they would offer the Talmud in the temple. Because when was the Talmud actually offered most days? In the temple? 9.5 hours of the day, 3:30 in the afternoon. There are exceptions. Erev Pesach, for example. They'd actually make it earlier. Tiknuz mana mitesha shao de mechza v'hiya great mincha katana. The right time for mincha is mincha katana, from 3.5 hours of the day on. That's the best time. You want to daven mincha exactly right, make sure you're davening at 3:30 in the afternoon. That's when you start your Shmona Esrei according to the Rambam. Does everybody hold of this? Is this the minhag? No. You are not going to have a minyan. I don't think you could find one around here. You could look for a mincha gedola minyan. There are people who are actually looking at the clock. Is it, half an hour after chatzot? Good, let's start davening mincha. And there are people who will make sure to start their mincha 20 minutes, 18 minutes, 10 minutes before sunset. And there are minyanim where on Erev Shabbos they're going to make sure they're going to finish at Chag Mincha. But you will not find a minyan that will say, we're going to start Shmona Esrei of Mincha at whatever, Mincha Katana on the clock. You know who is makpid for this time, though, to daven at this time? A bunch of Arabs. Well, okay, they are, but tell me where they are. They call it Mincha Katana, but it's not exactly like, they're looking at the clock. However, the Muazzin is time for this. Really? That's in between fine, but that's not why. It's because during break. There's probably at Machon Lev. Machon Lev, they have 3 minchas in the afternoon between classes. It's they're supposed to have classes for like 6 hours. I went there. Maybe it's changed in the last decade. But they used to have a break for mincha between classes. It's supposed to be a 15-minute break. Always end up being 40 minutes. Okay. Very Jewish. Well, maybe. But it's not like they're looking every single day to be with mincha katana. But the muezzin is calling the people for the afternoon prayers for those Muslims. They all go away soon. They daven at this time. Okay. Now, I'm not wishing death upon anybody, by the way, if they're decent people. Just saying they're not supposed to be here because we're not allowed to have non-Jews in our land, as we saw before. Okay? Oh, no, but they're Jews. Slaves are Jews. Ger Toshav. We're not allowed to accept Geri Toshav right now. When it comes time to accept Geri Toshav, we'll deal with them. Okay. And the Rambam continues, and here he brings, notice, Rambam does not bring Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Okay? Not like Tosfos. Tosfos says that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, like Rambam's opinion, like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion regarding what? Baga Mincha, but not with regards to Musafin. But Rambam's the exact opposite of Tosfos. Rambam's, according to the way the Rambam has it, Tosfos' answer doesn't work. He was left with Tosfos' question. We'll go over that. He says in Erev Pesach they would daven Mincha early. So, and why? Because they would offer the Talmud early, even as early as Mincha Gedola. That's why Mincha Gedola exists. According to the Rambam, you can daven Mincha for Mincha Gedola time. Davening Mincha Gedola, according to the Rambam, is like davening Shacharis an hour after sunrise or half an hour before sunrise. Not the exact perfect time to do it, but it's still perfectly legitimate because even in the temple they did it that way, and it's testified as such. So, and also once that starts, you're obligated. He says that there's some people who daven both Mincha Gedola and Katana, but that's a strange thing. Most people don't do that. So Rambam continues in the fourth halacha. Mincha Gedola is not just a point in time, half an hour after afternoon. It's from half an hour afternoon until 3.5 hours after that. Sorry, 3 hours after that. So Mincha Gedola is basically from 12:30 to 3:30. It's a long time Mincha Gedola. Uzman Mincha Katana b'teishu mechza ad she'er min hayom shah urviyah. Mincha Katana is from 3:30 to 4:45, an hour and a quarter. But not like Rabbi Yehudah, a person can actually daven mincha until the sun sets. Okay, so here's explaining what he meant ad ha'erev, until the sun sets. And lastly, he says regarding Musaf, Zmana achar tfilat shachar ad sheva sha'ot bayom. You have until 7 hours of the day, like Rabbi Yehudah. V'amitpalel achar sheva sha'ot afal pi shepasha. If you're davening Musaf later than that, that's a pesha. What's pesha mean in this case? Negligent to daven Musaf so late, but still legitimate. So you see, Rambam did not hold of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion regarding what? Regarding, let's say, mincha time at all. And he incorporates Rabbi Yehuda's Musaf opinion. He says, yeah, stick to Rabbi Yehuda regarding Musaf. This does not fit the way Tosfos says. Tosfos had asked, why didn't the Mishnah have this line of Rabbi Yehudah? It must be, Rabbi Yehudah says, Musaf, you have until the end of 7 hours. That line is not in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehudah Nasi left it out because he must not have held of it lahalacha. The Rambam certainly holds of it as halacha. He says, like all the other Rabbi Yehudah times, that's l'chachila. But he doesn't bring Rabbi Yehudah l'chachila regarding mincha. The Rambam doesn't say, and make sure to daven your mincha, what? Before, let's say, Plaga Mincha. Maybe you could read it that he's saying, yes, Mincha Katan is the best time, and you have an hour and a quarter to say it. Okay. By the way, certainly Rambam doesn't follow Tosfos' explanation here. The Kasha stands. Why is that not part of the Mishnah? Why is Rabbi Yehudah's line that you have until 7 hours to daven Musaf not part of the Mishnah? I don't know over here. Hold on 1 second. There's someone saying this. No one's joining us here. And he says that you could daven Mariv, what? Until from the beginning of the night, Ad She'aleh Omuda Shachar. The Rambam elsewhere says the beginning of the night means sunset. Sunset's a clear line. The Rambam only uses Tzeis HaChochavim as a time for 3 mitzvahs. Right? Nowadays they say everything's after Tzeis. I mentioned this before Pesach. But according to Rambam, Tzeis is only a din regarding 3 things. When Shabbos ends, and when you could say Kriyat Shema at night, and when the purity hits. For someone who went to mikvah today, when will he be fully purified? Pariv Shemesh. But for everything else, according to the Rambam, sunset is sufficient. Even for Dina D'Oraisa, sunset, all bets are off. Everything's over, especially the temple. They didn't ever wait for Tzeis for anything in particular. There is a consequence to this, but we'll see it elsewhere. Let's see. And he also mentions what happens if you daven early. The last line over here is V'yeshlot palel tefillah arvit shalelei Shabbat be'erev Shabbat kodem shetiska shemesh. See, the Rambam says very clearly You could daven Mariv of Leil Shabbos on Erev Shabbos before the sun goes down. That's a Kiddush. That's how he understands what Rabbi Yehuda's, this Avid Kamar. Sometimes you could daven Mariv early. And the Rabbi doesn't say, make sure to daven Mincha even before Flav. He just says, so happens, on a Friday, you could do so. You could daven your Mariv before the sun goes down. Shulchan Aruch would say you're required to. The Mariv of Motzei Shabbos can be davened when? On Shabbos. Anybody ever do this before? An early post-Shabbos davening? Most people. Yeah? Okay. And he says because Mariv is Rishus, it's not we don't really care about the time. Ein medaktikim bizmano. Mariv doesn't have a straight line. The Aruch HaShulchan expounds on this. Mincha has a clear line. No mincha after sunset. But Mariv, it sometimes goes into mincha time. It doesn't have a clear beginning line, and this comes into play on Shabbos. The reason, societally, we don't have early post-Shabbos Mariv is if you let people, let's say, 2 days ago, they were to daven Mariv, I don't know, at 4 p.m., people might be confused and start doing malacha before Shabbos ends. Even though we could daven before Shabbos is over, it does not permit the malacha. You have a question there? No. Just like when I daven Mariv early to take an early Shabbos, I'm saying that today is the Sabbath day and it's sanctified and the sun is still shining. Okay, it's not a contradiction. Now what? Finish davening at 6? Oh, you could do that. That's fine. Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty standard procedure. Yeah, they have to. Yeah. Well, are you going to wait in Manchester for 10 p.m. for to daven Mariv? And they also have to wake up the next morning to say Havdalah. They don't do malacha that night. Now, the Mishnah Berurah notices this and says, wait a minute. If you're a strict Rambamist or you follow the Vilna Gaon, that means you can daven Mariv every day, certainly after the sunset. But Kriyas Shema is only a mitzvah from Seis. That's 20 minutes or so later. So davening Mariv is totally legitimate after sundown, but Kriyas Shema is not. Now, most minyanim throughout the world, if it's Shabbos or a weekday, if they're davening Mariv sometime after sunset, it's still a time for Kriyas Shema. Or they just took in Shabbos early and the sun is still shining and they're davening Mariv, they're going to say Baruch Hu and Kriyas Shema and say all the brachos. According to the strict letter of the law, that's not Rabbeinu Tam, like the Rambam and the Mishnah Berurah and the Vilna Gaon. If you have one of these early Marivs, that is Mariv before it says for whatever reason, no Kriyas Shema, no Birchos Kriyas Shema. No one does that. Okay? But the Mishnah Berurah mentioned there are people in the know, so maybe you'll see the rabbi there when everybody's saying Kriyas Shema, Leil Shabbos at the early minyan, or he's at some minyan where they just started Mariv 5 minutes after sunset on a Tuesday. He's not saying Kriyas Shema with its brachos to everybody else. He's just sitting there silently, or he has secretly his little Gemara is within his sitter. He's not going along with it. The Mishnah Berurah mentions this, and this is something that I discovered my Rebbeim do. So word to the wise. And I try not to be the chazan if they're davening Mariv early, and they're expecting the chazan to say Baruch Hu with Birchos Kriyas Shema, and it's not after Seis, so better not to be the chazan. Okay, but that's not it's a little bit difficult. Now we're going to take our break here, and then we'll go into the next topic. Okay, questions, comments? Yeah. That's why you shouldn't live there. Yeah. That's really unacceptable. There's no. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it says on Erev Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos, but not on a weekday. Yeah. A medactic is mana, but so we're not medactic. It has to be reasonable. That they say that reasonable, just like he doesn't. There's they point out in the Rambam elsewhere that it's like lighting Shabbos candles. You do it way too early, then in what sense is it even nikar that it's Mariv? At least the mincha, it's the second half of the day. They knew when chatzos was, we're well into the day. But to say that we're just going to daven Mariv because we're feeling tired and the day is long, it's a little bit questionable. Even it has to correspond to something they did in the temple. The early Mariv of Erev Shabbos and Motzi Shabbos is because in the temple they were already doing the night shift, the Hector Chalavin, that afternoon at that point. If it doesn't correspond to when they did this, which is, by the way, Chag Mincha, then it doesn't work. It has to have some sort of historical precedent in the temple. Davening Mincha, whatever it may be, davening Mariv, 4 p.m., let's say 10 hours of the day, doesn't fit anything. Even Rabbi Yehudah would say, that just doesn't work. Yes, sir.
Why did Shabbat come in later this week than the week before, even though it's...
So the days are still getting up. Good question. The days are getting shorter. But sunrise is now getting later once again. But sunset is getting later, right? We're gaining from the sunset. Okay? But sunrise is still getting earlier and earlier every day. We still have a few more minutes to lose.
Days are getting shorter.
Yeah. But the sunset itself, based on the way we look at it, is 24 hours and a minute later than yesterday, right? Today. So that's true. But the sunrise was still 2 minutes earlier than yesterday. Tomorrow it's going to be a minute and a half earlier, and it's still going to get earlier and earlier.
Okay, so may I say that if sunset gets later and sunrise gets earlier, the day is in fact getting longer. What I think is happening is that sunset is getting later, let's say by 1 minute per day. But I think sunrise is getting later by 2 minutes per day.
Yes.
The day is still getting shorter, but the sunset is getting later.
Yeah. So we've hit that part of the year where basically where are we losing time? In the mornings. Most people aren't aware of the sunrise anymore. Most people look at just the Shkia. So they think that Shkia kept getting earlier. The earliest possible. Now it's getting later. True. But the sunrise is still getting earlier and earlier. Later and later. We're still losing time.
Every year.
Yeah, it happens every single year. It's the same exact thing. Okay? There's each one of these phenomenon, sunrise, sunset, length of the day, follows a sine curve. And a sine curve, it's the curve that goes like this, regularly. Every single day of the year, there's a thing that the x-axis is the day of the year, and the y is the time according to our 24-hour clock. So the sine curve of sunset has already gone past, the bottom trough. We've gotten to the earliest sunrise. Now sunrise will get later. But the sunset is still on its own curve. And by the way, the first derivative of all those means that Dafka, when the days, let's say we take the length of the day curve, the length of the day is at shortest. We're going to get to the lowest point on length of the day function. That means the rate at which the day is changing. Okay, that's a maximum. Sorry. So is that a minimum? Is at zero? Okay, the zero. So the rate when you get to the longest day and the shortest day, the rate of change basically approaches zero. But
Squashed together.
No, not just squashed together. This is a mathematical rule. When we get to the maximum points, where the days are long, the change in the days are the least. However, when we get to the nice average days, let's say the day of the equinox, the exact middle day, the rate of change per day, especially that day, is the greatest. The instantaneous change is the greatest. Okay,